My name is Haley. I am 34 years old and a single mother to an 8-year-old girl named Lily. I live in Portland and work as an interior designer. My life had never been what you would call glamorous until the night of my brother Ethan's engagement party. It was an elegant evening, crystal chandeliers sparkling, a piano tinkling like the soundtrack to a fairy tale. Still, I knew I did not belong there. I stood tucked in a corner of the ballroom, my hand clenched around Lily's small one, wishing only that the night would pass quietly. Then my mother came over and whispered, cold as ice, "Don't get on the stage. Caroline doesn't want you there. You bring bad luck." I froze in the middle of that crowded room, shoved into the shadows by my own mother as if my very presence were an unforgivable mistake. Before I collected myself, Lily suddenly let go of my hand and walked straight toward the stage. In the middle of the engagement ceremony, before hundreds of guests and dozens of cameras, she stepped up to the microphone. What she said caused the whole event to collapse in a way no one expected. Have you ever been treated by your own family as if you were bad luck? If you have felt unwelcome among your own relatives, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that worth is not defined by what others say about you. What really happened after that? I'll tell you. I still remember the moment Lily slipped from my hand like a soft breeze. Her pale blue dress fluttered as she moved through a crowd that was busy laughing and talking. I staggered a step and my heart hammered. No one noticed what was about to happen until she laid her small hand on the silver microphone, decorated with white and pink ribbons. I dared not breathe. The ballroom was still full of people raising glasses in celebration, the warm lights spilling across the high, ornate ceiling. A live band in the corner played classic jazz. But to me the air felt thick and heavy. "I'm sorry," Lily's clear, steady voice rang out, making many people pause. "I just want to say something." I could not move forward. My body felt rooted to the spot. Eyes turned slowly toward her. My mother's face tightened. Caroline stood beside Ethan, tilting her head as if she didn't understand what was happening. Ethan, my brother, only stood there, a small frown of confusion knitting his brow. "Tonight is Uncle Ethan and Miss Caroline's engagement," Lily continued, her brown eyes shining under the crystal lights, "and everyone is very happy. But my mom isn't allowed to be happy. Grandma says my mom brings bad luck, so she must stand really far away. But I don't think that." A heavy hush fell over the hall like a fast, heavy curtain dropping. I heard a few whispers, the soft clink of glasses set back down. I wanted to pull her down, to hold her close and shield her from those stares. My legs would not move. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the water glass on the table beside me. Part of me was scared, part of me stunned. Lily was doing what I had never dared to do, getting up and speaking out in front of the very people who had always turned their backs on me. "My mom is a good person. She works very hard. She draws beautiful houses. I've seen them. She cooks well, reads me stories when I'm sick, and she never makes anyone sad." She took a deep breath. "So why does my mom have to stand in the dark while the person who behaved badly stands under the bright lights?" I saw Caroline tug Ethan's sleeve and whisper something. Ethan did not turn away. He kept looking at Lily, his expression growing more serious by the second. "My mom is not someone who brings bad luck," Lily went on, turning to Caroline. "Miss Caroline, I heard you on the phone in the dressing room earlier. You said, 'Once we get married it'll be fine.' He listens more than the last one." She didn't understand all the words she said, "But I think that's not right." My throat tightened. The packed ballroom fell suddenly silent, as if the lights had been switched off. Faces shifted from surprise to shock. Some guests leaned in to whisper. A few people pulled out phones and began recording. Caroline's face went pale. Her lips pressed tight, then slowly she turned toward Ethan. I watched my brother's hand clench. "Lily," my mother snapped, stepping forward several paces, "you don't have the right to say nonsense like that." "I'm not saying nonsense," Lily replied, her eyes beginning to water. "I just don't want my mom to be seen as bad luck anymore." Those words cut through the glittering veneer of the evening like a sharp knife. Everyone knew this party was hosted by the Delaney's, wealthy, well-connected in real estate circles. Ethan was considered lucky to be engaged to Caroline. Me? I had been the shadow no one wanted to mention. I swallowed hard and could not move. Then a man's voice called out, "I can confirm what the little girl just said." Heads turned. Thomas, a longtime friend of my father and a former business partner of Caroline's family, rose from a seat in the back. He wore a gray suit, his silver hair neatly combed, and his gaze never wavered. I saw Caroline with another man in New York 3 days ago. It wasn't Ethan. He looked at Ethan. I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. I thought everything was clear. Caroline gasped. Are you going to believe such rubbish? She snapped at Ethan, grabbing his arm. This is made-up drama. That child is talking nonsense. Ethan did not answer. He quietly slipped the silver ring off his ring finger and placed it in Caroline's hand. The motion hit the room like a thunderclap as the party stilled in stunned silence. Caroline went ashen. You can't be serious, she began. Don't say another word, Ethan interrupted, his voice low but decisive. I've heard enough. My mother stood frozen, her face drained of color, the usual cool composure gone. She looked at me, then at Lily, and faltered. I still did not move. Only when Lily stepped down and walked back to me, her gaze bright and calm, did I stoop to scoop her into my arms. What were you doing, Lily? I whispered, trembling. You don't have to carry all of this. I don't want my mom to keep being pushed aside, she breathed against my shoulder. My mom is a good person. No one should treat her like that. I hugged her tight. The warmth in that hold seemed to melt years of pent-up pain. Under the dim ballroom lights, I realized I had never been defended, until my daughter stood up and did it for me. From the stage, Ethan began to step down. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a word. He walked straight toward us, eyes rimmed with red but dry. Haley, he said softly, I'm sorry. I looked up. You don't have to. No, Ethan shook his head, voice thick. I need to. I let others fill the space you used to guard for me when we were small. I owe you so much. Lily stayed between us as Ethan knelt and hugged her. I had never seen my brother like that before. Thank you, kiddo, he whispered to Lily. You just saved me from a huge mistake. I said nothing. I was still trying to make sense of what had happened. And inside me something long buried began to stir. Not anger, not triumph, but the quiet, overwhelming feeling of being seen, believed, and finally able to stand tall in a crowd without bowing my head. I had a family, but it wasn't the kind people speak of with fond eyes. It was the kind that taught a child to be silent very early. The memory of my 10th birthday never faded. That morning I woke up excited because my mother had promised a chocolate cake and my father said he would take me to the toy store after dinner. Our little suburban house in Portland was full of sunlight. I laughed when my father said he'd be home early to join a small party I had planned with the cards I drew myself. But he never came home. His car slipped off the road after a sudden storm on Highway 26. People said he had driven too fast because he'd forgotten to buy the cake. The very cake I had mentioned that morning. That night my mother returned with a pale face. No cake, no present, just a tight grip on my hand and 3 cold words. Dad didn't come home. I didn't cry. I sat motionless at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair he always used to sit in, and I wondered what I had done wrong. In the days that followed, adults whispered. An aunt muttered in the kitchen, if he hadn't gone out for that birthday cake, maybe he wouldn't have left. My mother didn't argue, she just stirred her tea as if the comment were true. I heard it. From that moment I began to believe I was the reason my father was gone. In the years after, my mother grew quieter. She provided what I needed, yet her gaze was no longer warm. Hugs became rare. Questions about feelings nearly disappeared. In their place came a patient distance, as if she were raising a child out of duty rather than love. Then Ethan was born, a healthy, lively little boy, a light in a house filled with too much shadow. My mother held him longer, smiled more, sang him to sleep. The room that had been my father's was refurbished for Ethan, and I was moved to the attic, the coldest spot in the house where I learned to wrap myself up and hide my sobs at night. Whenever Ethan brought home a good grade, my mother proudly showed it to neighbors. When I won a scholarship in technical drawing in high school, she merely nodded and said, "Drawing won't feed you." I wanted to be an architect. I loved plans and the way a bridge or a house could move from paper into something real. But my mother called it a pipe dream. She steered me toward office administration because, you can survive with that. I tried so hard not to disappoint her. Yet the silence between us remained like a thick wall. The bigger it became, the colder. Once I said I wanted to apply to architecture school in San Francisco. She shook her head, Don't waste money. Who will take care of your brother? So I shelved my dream, stayed in Portland, took classes nearby, and worked part-time to help with expenses. At 22, I married. He was a regular customer at the print shop where I worked evenings. He was kind enough, seemed to listen, seemed to need someone like me. Quiet, steady, undemanding. When I told my mother I was getting married, she only said, "As long as you're not a burden." The marriage didn't last. 3 years later, he left a short note and disappeared. We had suffered 2 miscarriages. He said every day with me felt like living under gray clouds, never knowing when the rain would start. I didn't blame him. I understood. I had never mastered the skill of making others feel at ease. I had learned to fold inward, to hide storms inside so others could turn away comfortably. Then Lily came. Doctors told me I had less than 20% chance of a successful pregnancy. My body was fragile, my womb thin, my spirit worn. But Lily arrived strong and healthy, like a piece of sky dropped into my hands. When she was born, I cried without making a sound, not from pain but because at last I held something that was truly mine, not taken away or denied. My mother came to the hospital, held Lily, inspected her, and said, "Let's hope she doesn't carry her mother's bad luck." I smiled, but inside something cracked a little more. No one in the family asked if I needed help raising a child alone. My mother said, "You chose this life, you deal with it." Ethan was busy starting his law career. He didn't have time to look back at me, the sister who had sat up with him doing homework, who soothed him when their mother came home late, who shielded him from rain on the walk home. I stopped wishing for someone to save me. I only hoped Lily wouldn't grow up thinking she was a burden. She was everything I did not have: a bright gaze, a warm heart, unconditional trust. Some nights when she slept, I'd stare at her face and feel a lump in my throat. I thought of the houses I never drew, the chances I had to pass on, the apologies I never heard. Then Lily would nuzzle into my arms, clutching her old stuffed bear, and I knew I was not alone. We didn't have much. A tiny rented apartment in the eastern suburbs, a table with 2 chairs, a kitchen barely big enough for one person to turn around. But it was home. A place without accusation, without judging looks, without anything forcing Lily to shrink the way I had. I had accepted fate for a long time. But Lily taught me there are things you cannot be silent about. Like the way she stood at the party tonight, her voice clear and unafraid. I had never dared to cross the boundaries others set for me. My little girl shattered them as if they had never existed. I am still trying to learn that. Learning to believe I am not the one who brings bad luck. Learning to understand that old wounds do not define the whole of who I am. And perhaps someday I will learn to forgive. Not for them. For myself, for having stayed silent for so long. The Whitestone Grand Ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers and the warm gold glow of hundreds of scented candles arranged along every banquet table. The faint scent of white lilies lingered in the air, violins trilled, and clusters of guests whispered and laughed, creating an atmosphere both glamorous and strangely distant. I walked slowly in with Lily, her small hand clutched tight in mine. The pale blue dress she had chosen 3 weeks earlier, the pearl-adorned Mary Janes, and the braid I had done that morning. All simple, all perfectly us. But in a space where everything was measured by price and status, even our modest efforts only made me feel more out of place. Caroline stood center stage in a fitted ivory gown, diamonds flashing at her wrist. Beside her was Ethan, my brother, neat in a black tuxedo cut just so. They looked as if they had stepped out of a bridal magazine. When Caroline's eyes landed on me, a faint curl of the lip appeared. Not quite a smile. More like an acknowledgement that I did not belong there. "Haley," my mother Margaret approached, her hand resting lightly on my arm like a wordless reminder. She didn't look at Lily nor meet my eyes for more than a few seconds. "Don't go on stage. Don't ruin Ethan's big day." I froze. I had no intention of going up. I didn't plan to step in front of the cameras or into the display of white orchids with the gold script reading, "Ethan, Caroline, a new chapter begins." I stood quietly behind the rows of guests, close enough to hear Ethan laugh, far enough not to attract attention. "I'm just going to sit at our table, Mom," I said softly, my voice hoarse with surprise. "Lily wants some cake, then we'll head out." "Then stay put," Margaret cut in, her gaze tilting toward Lily, "and keep that girl behaving. Don't make anyone notice you." I looked down at Lily. Her small face turned up toward her grandmother. At first her expression had been innocent, but I watched it fold into something quieter. She didn't speak, she only gripped my hand tighter. Margaret walked away without waiting for an answer. She returned to the circle of acquaintances by the champagne station, laughing more than I'd ever seen her laugh back when we all lived under one roof. I led Lily to the assigned table, table 12 near the back wall, right by the exit. We were not seated with family. The place cards, hand-lettered in gold ink on porcelain plates, had my name tucked alone among unfamiliar names. I helped Lily pull out her chair. She sat obediently, eyes fixed on the stage where Caroline smiled and welcomed people who clearly belonged to a class I'd never known. "Mom," Lily asked in a small voice, "why doesn't Grandma want us to sit near Uncle Ethan?" I paused. I had not thought she was paying attention. I had assumed she'd be distracted by the towering macaron display or the crystal lanterns above. But Lily had seen everything. "Sometimes," I answered, keeping my voice light, "grown-ups think if they put things in the exact places they want, everything will look better." Lily tilted her head. "But if I put the wrong jigsaw piece in, it will never fit." I smiled, and the smile hurt. She was only 8 and had grasped the imbalance I'd spent 30 years learning to accept. I smoothed the soft hair at her temple and said nothing. I feared if I spoke more I would cry. A while later, when Ethan and Caroline took the stage, the ballroom erupted in applause. Music swelled, guests sipped their drinks, and spotlights gathered on the couple as if that stage were the only world that mattered. I sat silent amid the laughter and praise, feeling like a stranger adrift in someone else's dream. "Is she Haley's daughter?" a middle-aged woman at the next table asked Lily. Her face was lined at the corners, her perfume strong enough I could sense it even from the distance. "Yes, my name is Lily," my daughter replied politely, a flicker of wariness in her eyes. "Oh," the woman said with a thin smile, then looked at me. "I didn't know Haley had a daughter. I thought she never came to family events like this." I forced a smile. "We keep in touch. Ethan invited us. I thought Lily should see what family gatherings are like." The woman fell silent, sipping her drink as her gaze passed over me like an appraisal of an out-of-season dress. Caroline was now giving her thank you speech. Her voice came through the microphone, perfectly phrased and full of confidence. She called Ethan the most reliable man I've ever met, and glanced toward his parents as if to seal an unspoken promise. Not once was my name mentioned. No one looked back to see where the woman named Evans sat. I wasn't surprised, just hollow. Lily leaned close to whisper, "Do you want to go up on stage, Mom?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. I don't need to be up there to see that I have worth." She fell quiet, but I felt her hand under the table slip into mine and squeeze harder. I sensed a quiet resistance growing in her eyes, like a cord pulled taut and ready to snap. The festive buzz flowed past me like a cold river. Amid the clinking glasses and music pouring from hidden speakers, I realized I wasn't angry at them for pushing me to the margins. I felt sorrow for myself for once thinking I deserved to be there. I had never experienced a moment so long as the one that followed. Ethan stepped onto the stage, the microphone catching a streak of golden light in that ornate room. He had always carried himself with calm confidence, the kind people expected to become a pillar of the family. Applause broke as he began to speak in his warm, steady voice. "Tonight, with all the important people here, I want to thank everyone for coming and sharing our joy. Caroline has brought me belief that a whole family can begin again. And excuse me, I'm sorry, but I need to say something." Lily's voice rang out, small, but in the pause between rounds of applause it cut through the extravagant air like an arrow. I looked up. Lily had slipped away from our table, her hair tied with the silver ribbon I'd put on that morning, her full skirt catching the light like a tiny streak of movement toward the stage. "Lily," I blurted, but my throat tightened and I couldn't stop her. Some people chuckled, thinking it a charming, impromptu child's moment. But anyone who watched Lily closely would see she didn't walk with childish innocence. She moved with a pure, steady resolve. There was something in her eyes that even I couldn't halt. Caroline tilted her head, brow furrowing as if sensing something amiss. Ethan put a calming hand on her shoulder, then looked toward Lily climbing the steps. An attendant approached, then stopped when Lily leaned in and whispered something. He hesitated, then stepped back. The child reached the microphone, standing on tiptoe to reach it. The stage lights swung to frame her. No one adjusted the sound. Perhaps they were stunned. Perhaps no one believed a little girl would do what she was about to do. "My name is Lily," she said without a tremor. "I'm Haley's daughter. She's sitting at the table in the back." I held my breath. Almost the entire room turned to stare at me. Curiosity, a hint of discomfort, mostly surprise. "I just want to say, my mom is not bad luck like people think. She hasn't done anything wrong. She hasn't hurt anyone or taken anything. She just wants to be here because Uncle Ethan is her brother." I felt my mother's gaze, tight, icy. Margaret clutched her purse to her chest, eyes darting as if afraid something would slip beyond her control. I heard Miss Caroline talking on the phone in the room by the cake. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I was looking for the restroom. She told someone, "Don't worry, in a few weeks it'll be fine. Ethan doesn't ask questions. I just need this marriage to soothe my parents." A cold wind crawled down my spine. The whispers spread like a tide through the elegant rows of chairs. Caroline's face flushed, then went pale as if the blood had drained away. She also said, "I swear if it weren't for the company being on the edge, I would never marry someone like Ethan. Too trusting, too soft, and lacking backbone." The microphone trembled slightly when Lily lowered her hand. The ballroom fell utterly silent. I couldn't bring myself to look at Ethan. I couldn't look at anyone. Caroline laughed, a high, brittle sound that shattered in the hush. "Kids hear things wrong and say silly stuff. Don't pay attention." "I'm not saying silly things," Lily turned to her. "I remember. Because my mom told me, if you can't keep your word, never say something important." I sprang to my feet. Not because I was afraid Lily would go too far, but because I realized she was doing what no adult in that room had the courage to do. She wasn't speaking for glory. She could not bear the injustice. Caroline looked around, beginning to lose control. "She's coached that child to say this. Kids don't understand. She's always hated me. She has nothing, so she's jealous of me." Noise swelled. Someone pulled out a phone and started recording. A few people murmured my name, others looked at Caroline with skeptical eyes. Ethan remained still. "Ethan," Caroline called, stepping forward and grabbing his hand. "You're not really going to trust an 8-year-old over me? I'm your fiancé." Ethan said nothing. He slowly withdrew his hand and turned his gaze toward me. His face held no anger, he was not confused either. There was only a deep quiet I could not read. Lily stepped back to me, eyes shining but unafraid. She laid her hand in mine and said nothing. I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the small heartbeat steady as if to remind me, she did nothing wrong. I lifted my head and did not avoid the faces around me. I had grown used to being seen as an outsider. Now my daughter had stepped into the circle and declared, "My mother has a right to be here." And I no longer felt ashamed of that. The room's air felt thick, as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out. Ethan still stood on stage, expression blank. Caroline writhed in faux distress while guests whispered and fished phones from pockets. Some people were already filming Lily's speech. I heard shutters click and a flash from a professional camera in the left corner. The official videographer kept rolling, perhaps not understanding, or perhaps understanding too well but unable to stop. "This is ridiculous," Caroline snapped, eyes darting among the faces turned toward her. "It's all a misunderstanding. The child heard wrong. And Haley," she glared at me, "she's always looking to sabotage me, isn't she? From the moment Ethan announced the engagement, she wasn't happy. Because she's jealous of what I have that she never will." I didn't respond. I held Lily tighter, my gaze fixed on Ethan. My brother looked as if he were caught between two worlds, the one he wanted to believe in and the one laid bare in front of him. From the third row, a dignified man rose. Neat suit, deep blue tie, half-frame glasses. I recognized him immediately. Thomas Callahan, founder of Callahan Partners, a real estate firm with connections from Boston to San Diego. He had been close to my father when he was alive. I used to call him Uncle Tom. He had always been kind, but after Dad's funeral our families had pretty much lost touch. His voice came slowly, not loud but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Excuse me. I don't mean to interfere in a family matter. But I think Ethan needs to know something." The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Caroline flinched, then forced a smile. "Mr. Callahan, I don't understand what you're implying." Thomas gave a slight shake of his head and didn't bother to look at her. His gaze was fixed on Ethan. Last week I was on a business trip to New York. While I was waiting in the lobby of the Astoria Plaza, I saw Caroline. I'm not mistaken, with another man. They sat very close, talked intimately, and I was going to say hello, but when I stood up I saw her kiss him. A kiss that was not between friends and certainly not between business partners. A few people gasped. The wine glass in a woman's hand slipped and shattered into many pieces, the sound ringing out like a bell signaling the end of an illusion. Caroline's mouth opened but no words came. Her hand trembled as she hurriedly set her clutch on the nearby chair, as if fearing it might betray her too. Maybe you mistook her for someone else. It could be someone who looks like me, she stammered. Thomas remained calm. I have known her since high school. I am not mistaken. At that moment Margaret hurried up onto the stage, placing herself between Ethan and Caroline like a shield against the storm. Everyone please be calm. Whatever is happening, this is still an engagement party, a celebration. We shouldn't let misunderstandings ruin it. I turned to Ethan. He was looking at Mother, and his expression had shifted from confusion to disappointment. Subtle, but I noticed. Are you taking Caroline's side? Ethan asked, his voice dry. Even after there's evidence? After a child stood up for her mother, and an outsider confirmed what she said. Margaret gripped Ethan's hand. You're upset, Ethan. Everything can be explained. Don't let a moment destroy your marriage. What about trust? Ethan asked, turning to Caroline. Can you explain this to me, Caroline? Caroline tried to smile, but her lips quivered like a loose door in the wind. Ethan, I just met an old friend. I didn't kiss anyone. Maybe Mr. Thomas saw the wrong person. Or maybe he's being manipulated. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting I'm lying? Caroline had no answer. Silence settled, long and still like a lake after a hailstorm. Ethan stepped back. He looked at me, then at Lily. He said nothing, not flustered, not angry. He removed the ring from his finger and slowly placed it into Caroline's palm. Ethan, you can't be serious, Caroline faltered. You won't ruin everything over a few careless words? Ethan's voice was low and firm, like a stone rolling down a cliff. No. I'm doing this because I've been blind for too long. I chose comfort over truth. But I'm not blind anymore. Margaret reached out to stop Ethan as he left the stage. You're destroying your own future. Ethan only looked at her, neither angry nor argumentative. If that future is built on lies, it's better it falls now. I took Lily's hand as Ethan came down and stopped in front of us. He looked at her for a long moment, then bent down and hugged her. Thank you, Lily, he said, his voice thick. You gave me something I didn't have the courage to face. Lily hugged him back tightly. I felt my brother's shoulders tremble. In the distance I heard cameras clicking. Someone had started a live stream. I saw Margaret's face go ashen as she glanced at a nearby phone. The headline flashed on a screen, $1 million engagement party and the bride's big reveal on stage. The room that had shimmered in warm gold was now bathed in a cold light of stark truth. No one clapped. No one raised a glass. Yet I stood there beside my daughter amid puzzled stares, feeling seen, not as a shadow, but as a real person slowly stepping out from the fog of the past. Margaret strode forward, her heels striking the marble floor like the cold ticks of a countdown to an inevitable explosion. She stood before me, her gaze penetrating, her cheeks flushed not with shame but with anger long suppressed. Happy now, Haley? She hissed through clenched teeth. You trained that child to make a spectacle in the middle of your brother's engagement? No one else would be audacious enough to sabotage this except you. I didn't respond. In that moment I was no longer the child who had cried in the attic hearing her mother call her a curse, nor the woman who silently hovered at the back of family events. I looked at her as an equal, not as someone begging for forgiveness. The child only spoke what she heard and felt was true, I said, my voice steady. You may not believe it, but I never taught Lily to hate anyone. It's the things happening here that made her speak. An 8-year-old doesn't invent such words. Margaret shouted, her eyes scanning the room for allies. But the gazes around her no longer leaned in her favor. Most were silent, some shifted back, a few avoided eye contact. They had heard. They had seen. Ethan stepped between us, cutting the tense air like a drawn bowstring. Mom, stop. Margaret turned to her son, gripping his jacket sleeve. Can't you see? Everything is collapsing. This party, our reputation, the business partnerships I spent months arranging. All because of a child's tall tale and an unreasonable sister. Ethan pulled his hand away for the first time that evening. No, Mom. It's collapsing because it wasn't built on truth. Nothing is being ruined, it's just rotten inside. Caroline stood behind him, face pale, eyes darting as if searching for an escape. When her gaze met mine and Lily's, her mouth tightened and she turned to Ethan pleadingly. I don't understand how this got blown out of proportion, Caroline said, voice strained. Okay, I admit I called someone. But I was just exaggerating to scare an ex. I have nothing to hide from you. What about the incident at the hotel in New York? Ethan asked, his voice no longer trembling but terrifyingly calm. Did you scare someone there with a kiss too? Caroline fell silent and then burst into a brittle laugh without any warmth. How ridiculous, Ethan. Who do you think you are in this relationship? You thought you chose me? Well, I chose you. Because you're safe. Because you're easy to manipulate. Because your mother opens doors others spend decades knocking on. Someone nearby drew a breath as if in disbelief. The ring Ethan had given her lay on the table near the stage, rolling, its cold silver reflecting the finality in the air. I said things others think but don't dare say, Caroline continued, smirking with defiance. And that woman, she pointed at me, always plays the victim. Pitiful, abandoned, misunderstood. If she were as righteous as she claims, why has Ethan never mentioned her? Because nobody cares. She hasn't left a mark. I felt Lily squeeze my hand tighter, her small fingers trembled. I bent down and whispered, It's okay, baby. I'm here. Ethan nodded. You said one true thing, Caroline. I chose you because I believed you. That was a mistake. I chose the wrong person. And today, before it's too late, I'm fixing that. Caroline's laugh broke into shards. You think breaking it off is that simple? You think your parents will stand aside? Or you think she can pull you out of the world you've built with 10 years of work? Ethan was silent for a breath, then turned to me and asked softly, Can you stay a moment? I need to talk to you. Not anyone else. Just you. I nodded. Lily still held my hand, eyes taking in the scene with a child's incomplete understanding, but sensing the gravity of what was coming. Caroline said nothing further. She walked away, her high heels clicking against the polished floor as if trying to force some remaining dignity. My mother did not call her back. She stood frozen, hands slack, eyes falling into an unfathomable empty space. Perhaps she had not expected what was collapsing to be more than an engagement. Perhaps she had not realized it was the very foundation of beliefs she had spent 30 years building. I watched Ethan. The boy I had once guided across streets each morning, who I'd urged to eat soup when he was sick, who I'd rocked to sleep with the clumsy tales I read from children's books, now stood in the storm and chose to come back to me. Not because I asked, but because he needed the truth from someone who never lied to him. And I understood. The time for shadows was over. I had been about to take Lily outside. The night air would likely be gentler than the stifling ballroom. But Ethan held me with a single sentence, Don't go, I need you. His voice was quiet, yet it kept me there. After years of being treated like a shadow, one sentence was enough. Lily nodded at me, a quick, reassuring motion. I'm okay, Mom, go. Ethan glanced toward the back of the stage as if searching the crowd. I followed his gaze and saw a middle-aged man in a light gray suit walking forward. He wasn't a familiar guest, but there was a confidence in his stride that made him fit among the hundreds of attendees and the cameras quietly recording each movement. The man stopped in front of Ethan, opened his briefcase and produced a thick envelope sealed with a red stamp. I'm the attorney representing the Delaney family, he said, concise and clear. Before you sign any marital documents, I have a legal obligation to provide you with the property agreement Caroline and her mother signed 1 week ago. You haven't signed it, but if you marry her, its terms will automatically take effect after 30 days. Ethan frowned, taking the file as if it were a block of ice. He opened it then and there. The pages inside were neatly arranged. I watched his jaw clench as his eyes skimmed the lines. This agreement stipulates that all your personal assets and income earned after marriage will be placed into a joint fund controlled by Caroline Delaney. Withdrawals, transfers, or investments would require her consent or that of a legal representative of the Delaney family. At that, Margaret looked as if she might collapse. She breathed rapidly and had to steady herself on the back of a nearby chair. The shock robbed her of composure. A sound escaped her throat that was more of a sob than a word. Nearby guests exchanged stunned looks and a few stepped back as if to distance themselves from a legal drama suddenly unfolding. Ethan closed the file and handed it back to the attorney, his gaze as cold as a midwinter lake. He looked at my mother and asked quietly but clearly, "Did you know about this?" Margaret shook her head, lips pressed tight, trying to hold on to some control. "I didn't know. I thought it was just a normal wedding arrangement. Both families have means. Agreements like this happen." "Normal is one thing," Ethan cut in, "but this is disenfranchisement." He turned to me, his voice heavy as stone in my chest. "Imagine if your daughter grows up and someone proposes only to own her assets. Would you stand by?" I didn't answer. I only looked at him, not with pity or blame, but with the single look I'd preserved for my brother over 30 years. A small reserve of faith no one expected to remain. Ethan slid his ring off and placed it on the table nearby without another word. The act was unostentatious, not theatrical, yet it rang louder than any declaration I had ever heard. Caroline stepped forward, trying to seize the file, but the attorney pulled it back. Her voice trembled. "Are you kidding? Over papers and a child's idle words, you want to end everything?" "No," Ethan said softly. "Because you were never honest with me. The papers were the last thing that woke me up." Margaret turned to me, stunned beyond comprehension. She opened her mouth but couldn't find the words. I felt no anger, only a small, inevitable sadness that she had placed all her trust in a stranger rather than the child who had stood there waiting for her to see him for decades. Someone at a table behind me lit up their phone screen. I heard a murmur, "This is already trending in Portland." Another person whispered, "Oh my God, they'll have to postpone the investment conference next week." I looked at Lily. She was still sitting in her chair, clutching the small stuffed bear I'd bought at a thrift store last year. She wasn't scared. She wasn't fazed. In her eyes there was something very bright, very clear, as if she were witnessing something she somehow knew would happen. Ethan came over slowly. He stood there for a moment, then asked quietly, "Do you blame me?" I shook my head. "No. I just feel sorry that you had to see it this way." He smiled lightly, like wind through trees on an evening in late summer. "You have Lily. I don't have anything. But I feel lighter. Very light." I squeezed my daughter's hand and whispered, "We still have family. It's just not the kind others define." Ethan nodded. In that moment I realized there are losses that don't need to hurt, farewells that don't require tears. Because truth always finds a place to reveal itself. And once it steps out, nothing can hide it anymore. While the whispers had not yet died down, a soft cough rose from the left side of the room. Not loud, but enough to turn heads. An older man, tall and thin with silver hair, wearing a simple but neat dark wood-colored suit, stood up. I recognized him immediately. Uncle Robert, my father's youngest brother. He had once carried me home on nights when Dad worked long hospital shifts, had placed my very first birthday cake on the table when I turned 4, and had quietly withdrawn from family gatherings after Dad's funeral, like a door closing without a goodbye. He walked to the stage without averting his eyes. Ethan stepped aside for him. Caroline had vanished from the hall at some point, leaving a hollow gap as cold as the way she had arrived and left. Margaret started, her face tightening in a flash of surprise mixed with tension. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Uncle Robert said, his voice warm and steady, slow but clear in the heavy air. "I didn't plan to be here tonight. For decades I was like many others. I chose silence, chose avoidance because I didn't have the courage to face the past. But today, after what Haley and Ethan have done, I think I no longer have an excuse to remain silent." I stood there stunned. How many years had it been since anyone had spoken my name like that in a crowded room? "What I'm about to say," he looked directly at Margaret, "will not be easy to hear. But Margaret, I am not saying this to hurt you. I only want to lay out a truth Haley should have known long ago." Margaret froze. She pressed her lips together, her hands clasped tight. Robert turned to the crowd. "When my brother, Margaret's husband, died in the car accident, there were a lot of rumors in the family. I remember at the gathering after the funeral someone said the accident happened on Haley's birthday. And from there started the story that the child carried bad luck. I was too young to think deeply then, and I I did not speak up. I bowed my head, feeling my chest open wide. The whispers from years ago were being repeated now, not in darkness but in the light, in front of people who had once turned their backs on me. But today I want to make it clear. Margaret was the one who first spread that story. She said in front of relatives that if Haley hadn't begged for that birthday cake, my brother wouldn't have gone out that night. I heard it. I remember every word. And I stayed silent. Margaret let out a sharp breath. Robert, what are you saying? That was when I lost my husband. I wasn't in my right mind. Who doesn't say foolish things when they grieve? You did not say foolish things, Robert answered, shaking his head. He pulled a small envelope from his inside pocket, the paper yellowed with age. And my brother did not think that way. This is a handwritten letter he left for me, written 3 months before he died. He gave it to me during a night shift, asked me to keep it safe and give it to whoever needed to read it if something happened. I kept it all these years. I didn't have the courage to open it, didn't have the courage to face whatever might be inside. Ethan stepped forward and took the envelope from him. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page, familiar handwriting slanted like the way my father sat when he signed forms. Ethan read it slowly, word by word. Dear brother Robert, if something untoward happens, I only ask one small favor. Please deliver to Haley what I have left for her. I set aside a savings account in her name and the deeds to the old house on Winthrop Street. Don't let Margaret know because I'm not sure she understands Haley the way I do. That child has an inner strength beyond what adults assume. I believe she's the most trustworthy person, the one in this house who watches without speaking, who endures without complaining. Tell her that, for me, she is not what others have labeled her. She was the light that kept me steady through long shifts. She's the reason I wanted to come home every day. Your brother, Thomas Evans. I felt rooted to the floor. My body had no weight. I didn't hear the surrounding noise anymore. The whole room went silent. Ethan looked up, his eyes rimmed in red. I had never seen my brother cry since Dad died. Margaret took a step back. Her face drained of color. Thomas never told me about that, about the account. Or the house. Because he didn't trust you, Robert said, not with hatred but with plain truth. And perhaps he foresaw something, the way you looked at Haley, the way you loved Ethan so much you forgot you had another daughter. I felt Lily tighten her grip on my hand. I looked at her and saw her eyes gleam. Not because she understood everything but because she knew her mother had just been called by a name no one dared miscall anymore. You have the right to refuse that inheritance, Robert softened as he turned to me, but you cannot refuse the trust Thomas placed in you. I did not answer right away. I only stared at the letter in Ethan's hands, as if trying to imprint every line into memory. I didn't need money, I didn't need the house. What I needed was the feeling I stood in now, that finally someone believed I was worthy. Not out of duty, not for appearances, but because they truly saw me. Ethan came down and handed me the letter. I took it, folded it slowly, and laid my hand on my chest to hold my racing heartbeat. Margaret said nothing. She just stood there with blank eyes as if she'd lost something she never expected to have to give back. I leaned toward Lily and whispered, Your parents left me a promise. And you helped me find it. Lily smiled, her face radiant like morning sun. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was lucky. Seeing her was proof. Ethan and I sat on a velvet couch beside the window overlooking the man-made pond behind the hotel. The golden lights shimmered on the still water like a mirror, the glow blurring across delicate ripples, forming a calm atmosphere starkly different from what had played out inside. He sat slightly angled, one hand on his knee, eyes downcast, silent as if sorting a lifetime of memories in a few minutes. I didn't push. Silence can be the only honest way people understand one another. Do you remember that night you carried me home from the stadium? Ethan asked in a low voice, no longer so guarded. I had twisted my ankle running around. Mom was at a parent-teacher meeting. I cried until I was hoarse and you tried to calm me, so you secretly called a taxi for the two of us, but you didn't have enough to pay. I smiled and nodded. The driver felt sorry for you holding your stuffed bear and didn't take the fare. I still remember the smell of your coat that night. It smelled like floor cleaner because you just mopped the floor that morning, Ethan said slowly. I never forgot that. But somehow as I grew up, I forgot a person. I looked at him. The light from the pond made Ethan's face seem younger, but his eyes carried more life experience, like the evening wind had stripped away the layers he wore to avoid feeling. I never expected you to remember everything, I said carefully. I only wanted you to be happy. Are you happy? Ethan stared at me for a long moment. Maybe not. I've always lived to please others. Mom, Caroline, work partners-in-law. I thought if I stayed quiet things would be okay. But peaceful isn't always the same as peaceful inside. I placed my hand on his shoulder. You still have time to live honestly. I believe where you start doesn't matter as much as where you want to go next. The ballroom door opened behind us. The sound of high heels clicked slowly. I didn't have to turn to know Margaret stood there. Maybe she'd overheard some of our conversation or had only just arrived. What surprised me was she didn't cut in, didn't try to take control. I'd like to speak with you for a moment, Haley, Margaret said, her voice hoarse as if sand covered her throat. If you'll allow it. I stood and faced her. After so many years, her eyes no longer held their usual sharpness. The measuring, judgmental look, an instinct that had been ingrained, was gone. In its place was a vague confusion, like someone waking from a long sleep. I didn't coach Lily to say anything, I said, keeping my tone even. She just couldn't stand the silence like her mother used to. Margaret nodded, eyes closing briefly. I understand. Or at least I'm beginning to. When your father died, I didn't know who to hate. I had no one to blame, and you were there, the only child who asked, who cried, who wanted to know where I'd go. I was wrong. About a lot of things. I didn't wait for her to apologize. I didn't need it. I wanted her to acknowledge I had been there. Always there. Not out of obligation but because I was part of this family, even if she tried to deny it. Tonight that child did what you should have done a long time ago. Protected your child from others, Margaret whispered. Haley, I'm not asking you to forgive me. But if you can, let me meet your daughter after this. I looked toward the doorway where Lily stood a short distance away, chatting with some older guests. A silver-haired woman bent down to give her a butterfly hair clip. A man patted her head and said, "You're brave like a courtroom lawyer." Lily laughed, eyes shining, unafraid, not a trace of confusion. She will want to meet you, I said, because she's never learned to hold a grudge. And I'm learning to let go. Margaret only nodded, her hand tightening around the silk scarf at her throat like someone clutching a familiar thing when the ground begins to shift. I went to Lily and asked softly, "Do you want to say hello to Grandma?" She looked at me, then at Margaret. She didn't rush or hesitate. Lily stepped forward, held her head high like a small adult and said simply, "People can make mistakes. But if you want to try again, I'll give you a chance." I heard someone choke back a sound behind us. Not every forgiveness needs to be expressed with tears. Some forgiveness comes from a softened gaze, from a child who tells the truth without fear of scolding, and from those who once turned away and now begin to nod. I was never born to be the lead in someone else's party. But today I stood at the center of my own story, heard relatives say my name with trust, and watched my daughter become the voice I never dared to have. And I knew I was no longer the shadow in that family. The next morning, as sunlight slipped through the curtains, Lily still slept soundly, breathing steady, her face relaxed as if she'd never faced the turbulent party just hours before. I made a pot of Earl Grey and poured it into an old silver-rimmed china cup I'd kept since college. Each morning, while the kitchen was quiet, I take a few minutes for myself. No phone, no voices, just the scent of tea and the steady beat of time. There was a knock at the door. I blinked and found Ethan on the porch holding a bunch of yellow tulips and a box of cinnamon toast I like but rarely buy. He smiled, a little sheepish, like a kid knocking on his old teacher's door after an exam he didn't do well on. "I didn't call first," Ethan said when I opened the door. "I figured if you weren't ready, at least I could leave something on the stoop." I stood still for a beat, then stepped aside and let him in. Ethan put the flowers on the kitchen table and looked around the small space, his eyes passing the framed photos on the wall. One of them me with Lily, the child grinning beside a pile of broken colored pencil shavings. "How long have you lived here?" he asked, his hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. "Almost 4 years," I answered, pouring another cup of tea. Not big, but enough quiet for her to study and enough light for me to sketch design samples. Ethan nodded. "I used to think money would make people happy. Now I see sometimes being seen properly is the hardest thing." I sat across from him. His hand rested on the table, neither clasping nor retreating. A simple gesture, but it meant the distance between us was no longer too wide to cross in silence. I laid my hand over his without saying anything. About 10 minutes later, Lily woke up, hair a mess, eyes still sleepy. When she saw Ethan sitting in the kitchen, she ran over and hugged my brother like he was a giant stuffed bear. "I thought you left," she whispered. "Where would I go when my little hero is still here?" Ethan patted her back. After a simple breakfast of toast and fruit, Ethan left, but not before promising, "I want to start over. Not just with you, but with Lily too. Not a grand event or fancy words, just a simple dinner once a week if you two don't mind." I looked at Lily. She beamed and nodded eagerly. I didn't say yes out loud, but I closed the door slowly when Ethan walked out, as if to keep a little of the warmth inside a while longer. That afternoon my phone rang. The screen showed Mom's name, the old number, and my chest tightened at the sound. I hesitated, then picked up. "Haley." Her voice was steady but without the usual chill. "I'm standing in front of Sweet Haven Bakery. I remember Lily likes their cookies. Chocolate chip, crisp at the edge, soft inside." I gripped the phone with both hands. The apartment was so quiet I could hear my own breath. "If you don't mind," she added, "I'd like to bring some cookies over. It won't be long. I just want to see you two for a moment." I didn't answer right away. It took a few seconds for the phrase, "I want to see you," to reach the part of me that had hungered for those words and then learned how not to need them. Today that sentence didn't make me weak. It made me lighter, as if the weight I'd carried for 2 decades had finally begun to lift. "She can come," I said. She arrived at 3:30 p.m. without makeup, wearing the old wool coat Dad used to own. She carried a box of pastries and a bag of clementines, Lily's favorite. She didn't hug me or say flowery things. But when she bent to retie Lily's loose shoelace, I understood. Something had shifted without a speech. That night, after tidying up and putting Lily to bed, I sat at my laptop with a blank document open like a fresh sky. I typed the first lines. "I am Haley Evans. I was the daughter labeled bad luck. I lived like a ghost in my own childhood home. I don't write this to blame anyone. I write to tell the stories of women like me, those pushed out of the light who found their way back." I wrote steadily. Old memories no longer prickled like wounds. They peeled away like paint to reveal a new canvas. The painting won't be perfect, but it will be real, and I am the one painting it with my life. Near midnight, when the screen glowed dim, I stepped onto the balcony. The city below still thrummed with lights. A breeze moved through my hair, carrying the floral scent of the tea on my sleeve. I lifted my face and for the first time didn't flinch from any gaze from the sky. I am no longer the shadow in someone else's story. I am myself, whole and enough. I don't have to pretend to be stronger, nor shrink to please anyone. I'm imperfect, but I am deserving. Not because someone gave me that right, but because I stepped forward, stood tall, and chose to believe I deserve love and respect without conditions. If you're listening to this, perhaps you have felt out of place in your own family. Maybe you stayed silent, thinking humility would keep the peace. But have you ever asked yourself, who does that silence protect and who does it hurt? I used to believe that if I were good enough, sacrificial enough, the family would come back. But some cracks only mend when truth is spoken. Sometimes the smallest, bravest voice, like Lily's, starts the change adults have been avoiding for years. What about you? Have you ever been misunderstood in your own home? Have you walked away from family to find your true worth? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every line. Maybe your story will be the light someone else needs, the way my daughter lit up a room that night. And if you want to keep hearing honest, moving stories about people reclaiming their voices in family and life, don't forget to follow the channel. You might see yourself in the next story.